Okay, so we might as well start. I think there's still somebody wants to have a limited time to do this. My name is Matthias Ronengo. I'm the director of the Bucknell Institute for Public Policy. I'm very happy to have our first speech of policy of the semester. And we're going to have a roundtable on sustainable clean water for Larabanga in Ghana. We had some kind of sustainable water. Here, if you have the original title.
This is just the name of our slideshow, but
Sustainable drinking water. I'm like, wait a second. I'm very good at not remembering titles of things. So we have Professor Austin Wade from Civil and Environmental Engineering, and 4 students that I'll allow. He will present, and they'll tell us a little bit about the experience they had in Ghana. So, Austin,
Thank you so much.
sorry. For those that are doing the public engagement, public policy engagement achievement, there is a QR code that you need to sort of use in order to check in, and we'll pass some little flyers that you can do that. I think there is also at the end of the PowerPoint a little QR code. Okay.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our presentation on clean drinking water for Larabanga, Ghana. I want to start off with our acknowledgements and thank yous, just to make sure that we don't forget this. So obviously for this space itself, I want to thank Matthias for inviting us to present, and Carrie, our test IT facilities, for all of your hard work maintaining these spaces and facilitating these type of opportunities to share and learn from each other and ask questions. I also want to thank the China Institute College of Engineering, the Department of Critical Black Studies, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering for funding and facilitating our travel to Larabanga over winter break. And then in particular for this project, I want to say thank you to Nita Banks for all of your work establishing this relationship with this community. While Fatau is not here with us, I do want to shout out Fatau Ibrahim, who's been a really important connection to the community of Larabanga and helped facilitate all of our work, whether that was sampling or traveling, both locally and globally. So next up, I want to just briefly give some panelist introductions. I'm all the way over on the right. My name is Professor Austin Wadle, and I use they, them, theirs pronouns. And then I'll give it over to our students to introduce themselves and then walk us through the rest of this presentation.
My name is Alessia Cusick, and I'm a senior environmental engineering student.
my name is Rhodenischelah Limage. I'm also a senior, and my pronouns are she, for environment.
My name is Brennan. Newcomb. I'm also an environmental engineer.
My name is Sean Oakey. I use pronouns, but also a senior environmental engineer.
Okay, so we're gonna get into the background of our project. So basically, Rhoda and I had the opportunity last semester to study abroad in Ghana, which is a country in West Africa. If you don't know, has anyone ever been to Africa? Has anyone ever been to West Africa? Okay, so there's some people in the room. Yeah, so we got to study abroad in Ghana, and we were actually on the southern part of Ghana, like right down here. But our trip took place in Larabanga, which is in the northern region of Ghana, where that red star is. And we actually took a field trip there over our study abroad experience with our class with Professor Hunter, who's right here. And we got to meet the community members, we got to meet the chief, and they presented this problem that they have a water scarcity problem in their community. And so we were able to make that our senior design topic. So basically, senior design with the engineering school is you get put into a group and you get to either pick or you get assigned to a project. So Rhoda and I picked our project, and then we got to bring Brennan and Sean on board. And then we got assigned to Professor Wadle as our advisor. And then we could start our project. And the Larabanga community relies on contaminated water sources for their drinking water and household use water. So that's a big problem because it spreads waterborne diseases across their community. So some site characteristics. Larabanga, Ghana has a population of 5,000 people, which is similar to the size of Lewisburg. And during their dry season, which is November through April, the water table drops really, really low. So right now they have like a lot of boreholes that the government drilled for them, but they dry up during the dry season. And Larabanga is located in the Savannah region, and it has a lot of mudstone, and then it's 200 meters above sea level. And this is what Larabanga looks like during the dry season. I just took that picture a few weeks ago, just to give you some context. So let's get into our project objectives and goals. So our goal is to develop a reliable and sustainable water supply system for the community. And we would like to address the seasonal fluctuations, the dependency on the contaminated water sources, and eliminating like external costs from importing water to the community.
So in order to find a solution to this problem, within senior design, we weigh different design alternatives. And the design based off our decision matrix, which is basically how feasible and how reliable and cost effective our projects would be. And we decided based off of our decision matrix that a manual pump well would be the most feasible design for the area and the location in which Larabanga is located. And just to give a brief overview of the design, so and for the first part, which is the construction, we would hope that the well is dug at an adequate depth so that during the dry season, the water table doesn't go below than what is expected so that the community will access the water. And then we would hope that it addresses the WHO organizations. In 2000, they said that per person, you need 20 liters per capita per day of water. So we also want that to address the amount of water one person would need. So like if there's 5,000 people, so you multiply that by 5,000 to get an average amount. And then we would also hope that our system is mechanical / non-electrical because we don't want them to have to rely on external sources like electricity and to also lower the cost of in which they were to access the well. And then it's also easier to use and repair if anything were to happen compared to our other design alternatives that we had. We had 3 other design alternatives. And then we would hope that the location, although we want it to be of easy access to the community, it also depends on where the most water yield is, meaning where we would have to access or the most water would be accessible, especially during the dry season. So that's also a consideration, but if it's not super close to the community, we would also hope that the community is still able to access it, even if it's not a far distance. But this is what just a rough visual would look like for a design.
I'm gonna talk a little about the quick overview and then we'll get into some more of the details as we follow the slides. So over winter break, in early January, the platinum bus flew from Washington, D.C. to Ghana, and we traveled up to Larabanga. And when we got there, we took some soil or some sediment and water samples with the help of Fatah. And then the following day, we met with the chief. And from there, we analyzed their current water infrastructure, like where they're sourcing water from and what systems they currently have access to. And then we did some community engagement and we met with some local people and spoke with them and what their needs were. And we learned some more about the culture of the region. And then when we were leaving Ghana, we met with the Ghana Water Resource Commission to try to access further data on groundwater elevation, how they fluctuate. This is some of the current water infrastructure that they have now. And I know we talked about a little bit before about the boreholes that were drilled by the government that don't work currently. And those are shown on the left side with the water tower. And there's 3 of them in the community now, and none of them work. And the government did not solve the community at all. It's needed of them, but they weren't done to an adequate depth. And there's a couple more examples of that. In the next picture, we have Wadle and Professor Wadle at another well that was dug. This was like a private funded project, but also not dug to an adequate depth and is out of service currently. And the community relies on what they call the ancient well, which is an open pit dug well here. It's about 28 feet deep. And it does provide like water to the community, but it's at a rather slow recharge rate. So the well fills up really slowly and they often have to wait for like 30 minutes at a time. And I have to like manually fetch the water. And then finally, Professor Nina Banks is helping to fund this community center, which has a manual pump well or automatic well that provides like an adequate amount of water to that region.
Cool. So onto the water sampling procedure. So one of the main purposes of our trip was to collect data so that we could implement it into our design. So we were measuring a bunch of different constituents in water. So with that being conductivity, which is basically how well electricity can pass through water. So it's a measure of how much like salts and salt metals are in the water. There's dissolved oxygen, which kind of speaks for itself, how much oxygen is in there, and E. coli and coliform bacteria, which are the causes of waterborne illnesses that cause a lot of digestive system diseases. And we sampled at several different places. So they have two community dams, which are these like surface water like ponds. They're recharged by like rainfall. And that's where they mostly rely on their water during the wet season, the dry season. But about halfway through the dry season, we found out that these places dry up or get very low, so they're not fully able to use throughout the year. They also have the ancient well, which Sean talked about, and the Learning Center well, which is the one that Professor Nina Banks is working with. And we tested the sachet water, which is another main area or source of water that they use. These you can buy in stores, and they're in plastic bags, but while they can be more reliable and like there's an economic then there's an economic cost to you have to buy them. You can't just like have that in your house. So we want to use the word implement as well as try and remediate those. And then we were also doing some sediment sampling, both in the White Volta Basin and in the community dam. The White Volta Basin the White Volta River is like this river in northern Ghana, and then we also sampled within the community. And here we're sampling for major and minor trace metals, such as like iron, copper, nickel, among several others. But these we want to really see if there's any more external impacts on the water quality, such as like gold mining, the Lopse they call it, or any other industrial activities that are happening.
Okay, so now let's get into our community engagement that we did when we were there. We thought it would be really important to connect with the community and make sure that we're installing a well that they like want and that fits their needs instead of just like swooping in and doing what we think is best. So we really wanted to connect with the community and make sure that we were establishing a connection with them. So one of the most important things we did was we continued our strong relationship with the community leaders that are there. We got to meet a bunch of people, including the chief's son, the community leader, Fatau, and then Sadiq, a university student who also lives in Larabanga. And we interviewed some local women and asked them questions about how they collected water and like what methods they use so that we could get a better idea of how that works in their community. And then lastly, we visited the local school with Fatau and we just played with the kids. We had a great time. It was really nice to see everyone. Again, we actually had seen them the past time we were there. And Fatau wanted to focus on the fact that he has his Larabanga Empowerment Project, which focuses on education and then also clean water for the community. So if we can help them address their clean water problem, then they can really focus on education. And here's some pictures of us with everyone.
In addition to the cultural awareness that we had while we were in the community, right near Larabanga is the Mole National Park, which is a forest reserve in which is Larabanga, as you can see, is located right southern there. In that area, we got to learn some history about it and also the fact that within that park, it brings a lot of tourism. And with the tourism comes the Larabanga Moss, which is one of the ancient moss located in Larabanga. So due to that, it brings tourists to the community and also introduces people to the community. But the thing is, with the Mole National Park, it's a complicated relationship with Larabanga. So with that park, when the park came about, they took away some of the land from the community. So the community used to use that land for water, used to use it for used to use it for like animals and like when they need land for farming and stuff. But due to the complications when the park came in and the reserve was established, they were unable to do that. So then their land size got reduced, and that's another reason why access to clean water is a challenge for them. So another thing we did while we were in Ghana, before we left, we went to the Ghana Water Resource Commission. So prior to our project, we had emailed them because while we were doing some research, we found that there would be some good information regarding groundwater data and water quality and hydrogeological information within different areas of Ghana. And one of those areas is within the northern region, and that's where Larabanga is located. So we had emailed them, and then when we got to Larabanga, when we got to Ghana, we visited their office and we were able to speak to some of the people within the office. And one of the things that we were assigned to do were to write a letter basically to explain what we need from the commission. And then they would submit that letter to their higher up who would ultimately approve that information because it's governmental information. So they can't just give it out to anyone. And we're still awaiting results back from that. But this information, when we do get it, it would help us analyze more water qualities and also different borehole depths that have been given from beforehand, which would also help us address what type of depth we have to dig when we do dig the well, and also any other effects that might affect water quality, like the limestone or industrial mining, which are things that tend to have an effect on water quality within the well.
So now we can talk a little bit about some of our preliminary lab results from samples that we made on site as well as brought back to Lewisburg. So we're anticipating measuring our trace metals in our water using inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry and our major cations and anions using ion chromatography. One lesson that we've already immediately learned is that you really need to be careful about your preservation methods. Obviously, we're sampling these on site and do not have a conveniently placed university that we have a strong relationship with. And so one needs to think carefully about what they add to those samples so that by the time they bring them back to analyze in your laboratories, that your samples haven't changed. So if, say, we're interested in something like the amount of lead in the water, if you do not acidify your sample, you have the chance to potentially underestimate the amount of lead you have in that water because it can absorb to the walls of your sample. So we had plastic vessels that are clean for trace metals, but if we did not acidify them, then we'd have a chance of underestimating that lead. However, when we acidified them, we acidified using hydrochloric acid, and that resulted in semi-quantitative measurements of fluoride, which is a really important lesson to be learned. Make sure that your preservation methods are aligned with actually how you're measuring your sample afterwards. And so we're excited to combine those alongside acid digestions and XRF measurements of our sediment samples themselves. The cool thing about our bacterial measurements is that they're made on site, so you can have that data as soon as those plates are finished incubating. So these are what we call indicator bacteria. The bacteria themselves are definitely not things that you want to eat, but they can also indicate that there is other bacterial contamination, particularly from fecal matter, which can cause some of those really problematic health conditions that we talked about. And so here we have a table of the 5 sites that we measured. Each of these is an average of 4 replicates. And the units are kind of funky. They're CFUs per 100 milliliters, so colony forming units. Each of the bacteria that are present in the water, once they have been incubated, grow into a single dot on the plate. And that indicates that that was a live bacteria in your water sample. And so these results essentially confirm the embodied knowledge of the community of Larabanga that these surface waters contain substantial amounts of fecal bacteria. And that could be from humans, that can be from other animals. On the scale of hundreds of E. coli per 100 milliliter in dam 1 and 2, and then on the scale of 20,000 total coliform bacteria, and then our dam 2 was too numerous to count, which leads to one of our first lessons from this process is that aseptic dilution water would be really helpful to have a greater level of detection so that we're not just saying that there's just too numerous, but that we're actually quantifying that number of bacteria. And then following that, our ancient well data. This is an open well, so there is air coming in contact with this water, shows relatively lower by almost an order of magnitude in total coliform, and then by about a factor of 2 to 3 of E. coli bacteria. And this is something that they know within their own embodied knowledge, is that well water tends to be safer in terms of their biological safety. And this is really greatly confirmed by the fact that we were not able to detect any bacteria in the learning center well. And this follows from that embodied knowledge. And then also kind of leads us to some of our next lesson learned, that these plates that we use specifically dispense only a milliliter of water. There's other ways to measure these where you filter a volume of water that you determine. And so you can get even lower detections on those water samples. And we similarly found no coliform bacteria in the sachet, that bagged water as well, which is good. It's always good to not detect those bacteria. It's worth acknowledging that other studies in the literature that are far wider ranging, tested more and different brands of bagged water, have detected these kinds of bacteria in them before. And so on top of that, plus potential plastics exposure, that is one of our other justifications for wanting to have a sustainable solution, not only the economic cost, but the potential burden from plastics exposure.
So one of the next steps that we had within our project, it was to conduct a siting, which is basically determining where we can find water from the ground, from the surface level. So we were able to contract this company within Larabanga called Conchalpe Engineering Works, and they're located in Domongo, which is not too far from Larabanga. And we were able to contract them. And because we weren't there to witness the siting, we were able to talk with our community liaison, Fatau, and he was able to get us some videos and information from the siting. So they use a machine called a Aerox water detector, which basically you walk around on the surface ground and it's able to detect moisture from underneath the ground, 57 to 70 meters below surface. And they basically roamed around the community where we think would be most feasible for a well. And they were able to analyze the sites to see where there would actually be water if there were to be a well that's dug. And the report we recently got back earlier this week, and these were some of the things that they said. It was the findings revealed 3 promising sites. Site 1 indicated moisture at 52 meters depth. Site 2 showed a water table signal at 58 meters, and Site 3 gave a positive reading at 69 meters depth. And our goal now is to further analyze these sites to determine which one is Site 1, Site 2, Site 3, and exactly from the findings that they found where the water, where the well appeared today would be most feasible. And in the next slide, we have a video of just a quick synopsis of how the testing is done. So that's the machine. And they basically stand around areas and they depend. The machine will be beeping. Can't hear it, but it has a beeping noise. And if it detects moisture within that certain depth, it'll beep, and that's how they know. But that's just a synopsis of.
So moving forward, so we have our cost estimate provided by the contractor, and this falls within a similar range of other projects. That would be around $5,000 to $7,000, at least depending on the siting, which we just showed in the previous slide. And drilling, construction, and materials. And the main price fluctuation is with the drilling depth. And I mean, as we just saw, that there's a good like 10 to 15 meter fluctuation. Drilling further would increase the price of the project, but ensure that the well lasts for a longer time. So the next steps for this semester on our end would be to use XRF and acid digestion for the sediment samples to get a mineral analysis and see like what is really in the soil. And then analyzing the survey results as we're just talked about, we want to like actually assess the 3 sites and figure out which one would be the most feasible. And then we want to go up with the official design, which accounts for our sample analysis and any further steps that we need to take if water modifications needed. And then finalizing a construction plan and continue our communication with who's our community liaison. And finally, just finish up some grant applications on construction. Cool.
One thing we really wanted to emphasize during this project, and the term that we learned during our research, was peace engineering, or the proactive use of engineering skills from peaceful and just existence for all people. So this project really like illuminated the humanitarian aspect of engineering, where we were working directly with the people who are going to be using our product, and they really like to have a necessity for this water, which really is very relating to all types of like environmental engineering projects, because oftentimes we're designing like sanitary like waste treatment centers, or drinking like well treatment like drinking water treatment like this, or we're remediating a contaminated site that's like in like neighborhoods like where people live. So it's really important to keep the aspect of like who we're working with, and it's not just a project numbers on paper. This is real people's livelihoods that are affecting. So, and with that, we were able to incorporate all stakeholders. So we were able to get like the perspectives of the community of like what they really need. And I think that's where all these like governments, well, all like the Ghanaian government and these other privately funded projects failed, is that they didn't like speak with the community of what they needed. They just swooped in, dropped a well, didn't produce any like maintenance plan, didn't teach anyone how to do any upkeep, and then they left. And that's why you see so many failed projects of them trying to get drinking water in their community. So there's really so many advantages to having personal relationships with the people who we are serving. So it was really great to be able to go on this trip and be able to get good practice with that.
So we wanted to thank you so much for coming, and then we're opening up the floor for any questions that you guys have.
How long do you think the construction of everything will take? And once you find the money for all of the, digging and all of that, how long do you think it's gonna take?
When we talked to the community leader, we actually asked that, and he said that they can actually do this in a day. Because the siting is the first thing that's done, and that's usually done like the day before. And then they come in and they actually bring the drillers and the contractors, and they're able to know. But the thing is, if they interfere with anything within the ground that enables them to not dig further, or they're unable to dig further, then that's where more time would come in for the construction. But normally, if everything goes well, they should be able to about it. That's what we were told.
So your solution is to dig wells, but it looks like you have access to surface water. It's contaminated. Did you explore possibly just decontaminating the surface water?
Yeah, so we did explore that. The problem is the fluctuation in the water table during like the dry season versus the wet season. So like the water goes really far down, and so it gets more and more concentrated with more and more contaminants. So it's honestly easier to dig a well than to try to like get rid of all those contaminants.
And you don't have access. There was a river that looked like it was 5 kilometers away from the city. You don't have access to that either.
We looked into the river.
That one, so when we were driving the first river, the White Volta Basin, it was about I think we were 3 hours away from the beach. The distance is much further because the community is located a little bit further from that area where the White Volta runs. Because if you look at the maps from where Larabanga is located, the river stops like right before you get to the community. So accessing that would be a most challenge. So we were trying to find a design in which we're able to limit the amount of time it takes to actually access the water. So we thought, okay, if we try to stay within the community, that can help lower the time and cost of traveling back and forth for the water. But it was something we looked at briefly in regards to travel time, and also just making sure that the community can still have.
We also looked at like the little tributaries that go off of the river, and they dry up during the dry season.
So who primarily is responsible for, if you were to travel to get water, who in the community would do that?
The women in the community are primarily responsible, which we learned from just seeing it and also in our conversations. And we talked to them, and they said they can spend upwards of 8 hours per day just going back and forth into different water sources, just getting water. And they do it all on foot, and they carry it and almost like all themselves. So it's like that was another thing with the peace engineering with the Larabanga Environment Project, is that creating more access to clean water would minimize the time that women in the community would have to spend. And with the education aspect of their project, they want to emphasize like access to education for women and girls in the community. So it's really this clean water. It's just like access to water is like the first barrier that they can get to further continue to like improve their community.
And during our time there, we were able to speak with different women, like different age ranges, and they start at about 4 years old. And some of them, I remember one woman, she told us that she remembers, or we asked her, like, what's the youngest, or when did you start collecting water? And she said, since she was on her mother's back, meaning that sometimes women would travel to get water and they carry the children on their back using I can't remember what they call it, but they tie their children. Yeah, and then they go with them to collect the water. So it's something that's very common within the community for women to be the ones who are in charge of gathering water.
So I have a technical question more. Are you gonna hit bedrock when you drill these wells?
That was something that was in consideration to her question when she asked how long would it take for construction. That's something we're thinking about, that if we were to hit bedrock, then that probably mean that that site we might have to switch to a different site, or that would delay the construction process, because then that means that we might not be able to access the water that's deeper. And I think that's where the construction might take a much longer if the site that we do come to if we do use ends up we hit bedrock too early, then that's gonna be a problem. But
So you don't want the well in bedrock,
not
you want it in the overburden. And has your XRF shown any materials in the overburden where like pumping them up through, like the classic example is Bangladesh, where they mobilized a bunch of arsenic by pumping wells? Is there anything in the overburden from the mudstones that you're worried about?
That's why we're still analyzing some of our samples, because we had just started using the machines and we are getting ready to use the XRF because we need to get training for that machine. So we will soon see what our results are from this.
So the XRF only detects down, it only detects down into the ppm, not the ppb.
And that's why we're acid digesting
Acid digesting.
and running on the ICP-MS for all of those really, really trace metals that are still very important to think about.
That'll take care of your arsenic, but
And in relation to the bedrock, that's why we're requesting data from the WGRC, because they have data on like bedrock water table depths across North Carolina. So we're hoping to use that as part of our plan.
great. Great work.
Yes.
I wanted to hear a little bit about the conversations that you have with people in the community and what were some of the kind of like unique and cool things you booked.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. So we had some interviews with the local women, and one of the women we interviewed, she was quite older, and she was telling us and showing us how they use water as part of like the ritual practices in their community, and it's part of their culture. So they don't just use water for like drinking and then household use. She was literally showing us like how she performs like blessings with the water that she collects. So it was really cool.
Was also really interesting conversations because she didn't speak English, but there's one answer that she did, so she entirely like curated it out. Like it was very effective, like we knew exactly what she was talking about. So it was just fun.
I was late, so I apologize if you covered this before I got here, but I was curious, once this goes in, and this is regarding to your mention of the failures of other projects, like who will be in charge of maintenance? Where's the continual funding for maintenance? And how do you get sort of buy-in from the community to I mean, I just think of us, like we pay for water. And that, so is there any kind of structural, political stuff that will help ensure maintenance, or how's that gonna happen? Do you know?
Yeah, so we're definitely trying to get Bucknell more involved with the funding and the continual funding each year. We're hoping that every single year, at least one senior design project has something to do with the well and maintaining it. And then we're trying to get as much funding as possible to make sure that it keeps going. But we also want to put some of the, not burden, but some of the responsibility on the community, so that then if we train them, they can perform the maintenance, so that they're just not left high and dry with something that's broken.
And also, our interactions with Fatal, he has taken a very big role within the community regarding anything interacting with people who do come in and visit the community. So we would hope that we're able to continue that interaction and also get any updates from him. Like even with the sighting, the moment it was done, he sent us a message on WhatsApp letting us know and sending us that information. So I think that continuous communication with him and like some of the other community members has been really helpful, especially throughout our project. And we hope that can be.
So with that too, Sadiq is one of the people who was helping us with that, and he's a big helper at Fatau in the Empowering Project, and he's in school for some kind of public health technique too, and he seemed very interested actually with the Empowerment program and helping out as well. So I think he's a very good person to like step up and help maintain as well. So
Thanks.
Curious if there's any pushback in any factions of the community against the project in any way, shape, or form, any resistance to the idea of the project.
Not that we encountered. I think everyone seemed extremely optimistic about it, and we know the community leader and all the officials of the community, everyone seemed like really supportive and would do whatever they can to help us.
Yeah, their culture is so friendly and so giving that they literally like helped us the entire time we were there. They gave us everything they had. They were so thankful we were there. So honestly, it was the best opportunity to see how nice and welcoming people could be.
And even though like we came in, we're students and we came with our professor the first time and then the second time we came with our professor. And even though we hadn't started anything, they were still very grateful for our project. I remember the night before we met with the chief, Fatal, the community liaison, gave each of us a shirt on behalf of the community with our names on them and in a representation of one of the things the community is known for, which is the loss. So they're very thankful, and it was honestly heartwarming because we haven't done anything yet, but they were still appreciative of our efforts to go in and try to come up with a solution for this problem. So far we haven't got any pushback.
If I follow up on that, but from what you presented, the government, the national park had a negative impact. Took the commons from them, they couldn't use it, they still cannot use it. And that's part of the origin of the problem. And do they get any benefit from the federal government associated to this, to the the national government? If they're taking resources, is there some sort of, I mean, it seems not tourism even is something that happens there.
There is tourism. In the map, it's right at the kind of gates of the park, so you do have to physically pass through Larabanga. Although, kind of to your point, there are some critiques that the tourism could be more. And I also understand that there's lots of discourses about how much tourism actually benefits the local community. And so from our conversations with them, they seem to have a pretty mixed feeling about it, because they do get to engage with the park itself in the ways that it kind of formalizes, but there are, to your point, some specific practices that were outlawed because of the installation of the park. So traditional hunting that they now call poaching. And while we might typically think of poaching as something that you see like CEOs of multinational companies doing, it is still often wielded against those local indigenous populations. And this reflects the same kind of land reforms that we saw in what we now call the continental United States in regards to the establishment of our national state parks. So you can imagine that the communities have a mixed feeling about the park in specific, and particularly the ways that it changes land relations between people who have been living there for much longer than the park has existed there.
So you have all these boreholes that the government drilled. What's wrong with them? Can you just fix them? Just clean them out, run them.
No, they're typically above the water table depth, particularly at this stage of climate change.
Can't just keep going. Like you could, I mean, they got to drill the hole pretty far down, right? So how much? We're talking 65 meters in the one case. I get that, but I'm just thinking of like those are already holes. Maybe they're just not deep enough.
They're also not particularly accessible locations. And so that was another goal of our project, is to make sure that it's in a location that's physically accessible, because people are having to physically fetch it themselves and walk, on a scale of kilometers. And so, kind of these previous questions about longevity, one exciting potential future project are distribution systems. So if we can pump out a decent amount of water, we can think about distributing it to other accessible locations within the community, which would be particularly exciting.
This is more of a, I guess, a comment, and to build on Matthias, your question. When we were up there the first time, one of the things we learned is that animals from the park, there's no fence around the park, animals from the park come and trash their crops, the stuff that these folks are growing. So for us, it's an unambiguously good thing that there's a national park preserving the lives of elephants, you know, all the other, and it is, but there's this other factor, and you know, these people need to eat, and so it's just not as simple as park good, human intervention bad. It's just not that simple. And the second thing is that there's a very robust body of sociological and historical evidence that if you can get good accessible water, it's not just the health benefits, it will make the lives of the people in Larabanga, especially the women, so much better. It makes female education more possible because they're not spending 5 hours a day getting water. And we can go into the gender roles of that and the inequities there. But having water pumped into houses in the West, in the global North, is what made so much social progress possible. So that it's not just a matter of clean water. The implications are much, much bigger. So yay, all of it.
I have another follow-up question, and going off of what she said about preservation or like maintenance, because looking at the levels of E. coli or bacteria that you saw on the other wells, like what is connected with that preservation or maintenance? What is the plan for like keeping it as clean as possible? Not only maintaining it functioning, but also keeping it as clean. Given the fact that all of these other wells have developed or like grown so much bacteria. Like in one of the cases I saw, it was like too many to count. So what is like the, I guess, cleaning maintenance of the water in the well?
So it's worth saying that they do disinfect their water if they take it from, or when they do drink from the 2 dams that we had, those 2 immersed account ones, they will disinfect that water. But granted, that is its own additional burden. They travel to Tamongo and buy chlorine bleach-based disinfection powders and pods, which granted also adds time and also the potential for carcinogenic disinfectant byproducts that come from if you have a ton of organic compounds in the water already, you have the potential to form those. And so the time, carcinogenic after effects potentially, which granted, you know, you take those instead of having that really immediate impact of diarrhea, dysentery. And so, you know, having a well water instead generally is particularly those mechanized ones that are not an open well that come into contact with air. But those are really key aspects of it. And so I think one thing that we're interested in exploring is developing some of this monitoring experience and knowledge within the community as well, so that we can say ship out these plates and have the community themselves test their own water and feel knowledgeable and confident and have that monitoring experience, so that if, you know, maybe they do notice a child or like someone notices stomach problems the next day after using that well water, they can confirm that bacteriologically and then come up with either a short-term solution of disinfecting your water, so passing out those bleach tablets to the community so that they can be readily accessible, and particularly for those who might be immunocompromised in particular, that having that experience is particularly horrible and dangerous. And then think about long-term solutions like, you know, a filter cartridge on the at a different point. Say we think that the bacteria is coming from a storage tank, then we can clean it, disinfect it, or if we think it's kind of coming in earlier in the process, like maybe there's some bacterial contamination of the groundwater, which granted is unlikely, but still possible depending on, what ends up in other nearby wells. Installing a filter cartridge, or thinking about post scale, large scale, slow sand filters would probably be another design process. And so incorporating those into future design, senior design projects is definitely a priority of mine as a professor.
There's gonna be like a continuation project. So like I know the two girls mentioned that they're seniors and I can't remember you. Okay, so everyone's seniors, but is it gonna continue with other like juniors or like sophomores or whatever? Like, is this
We're not allowing them to graduate.
We're very excited for all the students to graduate this spring. They've done such hard work. I'm really, tearfully looking forward to that. So senior design projects happen every year, and it kind of changes formulation sometimes. And there are other opportunities like the interdisciplinary senior design experience. And so my goal is, with the community's interest, right? That is a big piece of this. As long as they continue to have interest in this partnership, then I'm committed to, if it's on the scale of one senior design project a year, I think that kind of feels reasonable. And continuing on with this relationship, they have a lot of cool, potential opportunities to engineer. At the Learning Center, they have septic tanks with potential opportunities for biogas. And so if the community is interested in thinking about alternative cooking fuels using biogas, that potentially is really exciting. But as well as other kind of clean drinking water associated things or sanitation things are all things that at least I'm interested in. And, if they're interested as well, and if we have engaged students, then I think I'm excited to continue.
And our primary goal is before May to get this one well done. And then we're gonna work with Professor Wadle to set maybe some more long-term goals. So that's exciting.
Or maybe, yeah, I'm not.
Sorry, so clarify, I already asked a question.
You mentioned that you visited a school, and I was just wondering what the interactions were like with the kids, if they have an idea about the impact that access to water or not having access to water has on their lives. I mean, there might be a way in the future to partner with community organizations like schools for the maintenance piece.
Yeah, so the school we visited is particularly for children who are like orphans and impoverished. So they don't have like primary care that they need. So they definitely are already struggling as it is. And then on top of it, access to clean water. I think it's so common in their community, the struggle of getting water and like the time it takes that they don't live here, so they don't realize like we walk into the bathroom, you turn on the tap and it's right there. But I think they're definitely like aware, wouldn't you say, of the problem?
I feel like also the school that we visited, the children were fairly young, so it would be a nice opportunity, like say down the line for education purposes, there can be taught like different ways in which water treatment works and the availability of water. Because I feel like as children are vulnerable and sometimes they don't know a situation of something unless they're being more aware of it or they're being told about it. So I feel like the education portion would be another addition to informing them about the situation of the water. But for us, our visit, it was more so we brought the students, we brought them some books and we were able to interact with the kids. But it's something maybe in the back of our heads or like later down the line, an educational component can be installed in regards to teaching them about water sanitation and
Were there any policies specifically that might have made it challenging to engage with this project in Ghana, or was everything kind of smooth there?
because we were mainly contacting like with the community liaison, we didn't have to go through any type of policies. Like we were communicating with them and like they were the ones that helped us contact the contractors and we were able to also get estimations from them. So from so far of like since we started our project, not really, but I'm not sure what the next couple months will forward.
I think it's really interesting.
So I wonder, maybe it's a main question, but since the financially also burdensome project on you guys too, is there any other way to make it bigger? Like, for example, connecting with the UN help, because they allow youth projects and you might actually find some spot there, or maybe the World Bank projects. I don't know if you're searching there.
From some of the research I was doing, a couple of the organizations that did come or partner with areas around Larabanga or Tamale, which is not too far, there was a lot of issues in regards to accessing like the community, or like there were some conflicts regarding that. Like I remember there was one organization, I cannot remember the name of it, but they had said like when they were trying to access they were trying to come up with a project in a nearby community, like there were some challenges in regards to getting funding, or funding had to stop. And I tried to contact them to see like why that was, but I wasn't able to hear back. So not really, we haven't thought about like interacting with bigger organizations, only also because that also brings about conflict within that. And so like, for example, if they come in and now the community has to like talk to them, or like say the project gets built, now they have to get a portion of some type of financial constraint on the community, or the community would have an economic burden. So I'm just thinking about like the article review you've done, and just like talking to the community also. It's something, it's more so small scale for now, and also with like our being students and stuff. So it's not something we've done or thought about, but we've done research on what were some past projects, just to see like what are some ways that we could improve or think about for our project.
Along the same lines, I'm just wondering whether it's the UN or it's Bucknell, like, is there any way to, I don't know, raise money within the community, like a water tax? And I don't know about the financial situation, but I know there's an organization called Agua Clara that's providing clean drinking water designs in Honduras. And I know that they found that as far as keeping up the maintenance and getting buy-in with the community, it was really effective. It was a small amount of money, but raising, the money so the community itself is not dependent on others coming in. So I don't know. This is a question more for policy people, economics people, not you or me, but just something to think about. And I can connect you with the Agua Clara people if you want to ask them how they did that. But
That would be helpful. So we haven't thought about that. So that would be something we could.
One last comment for everybody, if anyone in the room, there's any possible funding sources for these folks to get this well dug, please contact any one of them. Because this is, tremendously important work, and Larabanga is a fantastic place. You guys done it.
One last question?
Yeah.
Brennan, you had a question there? No. I think that's it. Well, thank you so much.